got our Atlas Platinum ALI certified 10,000 pound lift installed. Now today, we're going to show you a complete how to install this. Now, we realize that most people probably aren't going to install these themselves. However, it is possible. Most of the time, you're going to have a professional come in and do it. But we thought it'd be a great time to show you a lot of the features along the way of installing this, as well as the build quality of this thing. Now, we're really impressed with it so far, but there are a couple of things we want to talk about. Let's get started, then we'll come back and wrap all this up.
So the first thing we had to do was really determine the layout of the lift. We chose a symmetric design. You can also do asymmetric where they're somewhat angled. Also, instead of measuring over and over while you're kind of getting this situated, we went ahead and cut aboard the 100+ inches that our lift required, and that kind of squared things up to just kind of get it in line. Next, once we kind of drawn out where this was going to go, we had to also set them plumb. In other words, so they're nice and vertical, nice and straight, and also straight to one another. And we need to get that within, it said 1/3 of an inch, which I don't know how you measure 1/3 of an inch, but anyway, we got them within 1/4 of an inch, and then you want them within 1/2 of an inch between the two columns. Once we had the layout complete and we had them nice and plumb to one another so they're nice and vertical and straight, we went ahead and started drilling the 3/4 inch holes for the fasteners. Now, again, you want to make sure that you're somewhat plumb, and we can address it more specific later, but you want to make sure you're plumb, and you want to make sure you've got the columns in the right area, and then we're going to drill those 4-inch holes required for these 3/4 inch fasteners. By the way, this is also critical where you have to make sure that you have at least 4 inches of 3,000 psi concrete or more. I won't get into the specifics of the engineering on that, but we definitely superseded that with more than 4 inches of 3,500 psi concrete. So here we're continuing to drill these holes and vacuum up that dust. By the way, that's one thing you don't want to be breathing is that silica dust from concrete. Not good for your lungs at all. You also see we have a piece of tape on our drill bit just to mark that 4-inch plus that plate to make sure that we're drilling deep enough for these fasteners to go in. Also, these fasteners got to be hammered in pretty well. You know, you don't want to beat on it forever, but you do definitely have to drive them in. Now we're just kind of tightening these up with a ratchet. You see our plumb string sitting there to make sure that we're somewhat plumb. And now we're addressing again just the plumbness of this and adding our shims where we need to and making sure that we're getting these columns dead straight. Now once you have everything plumb, you've got your shims in and you know you're good to go. The final step here is to actually torque these down. Now they recommend that that they need to be torqued to 150 foot-pounds, and if they won't accept that torque, in other words, if they're slipping or pulling through, then you may have to address some concrete issues, so it is critical that you can get that 150 foot-pounds. And now we're ready to start assembling our lift.
Since these column extensions are a little heavy, I want to go ahead and just use a pair of vice grips and a couple of these shims just to protect the paint and kind of create to a stop block here, if you will. There. A little bit tricky because these are carriage bolts and they go in from the inside of that lip out to here, and the nuts will go on the outside here. I wouldn't tighten these until you get all of them in, because you got the 4 here on the rails and then you have 2 on this back side over here. They seem to line up well. No issues there. Take this off now. All 6 holes seem to line up very well, so all the machining's done very well on it. Now I can take my ratchet and start to tighten these down. As I mentioned, they're 15 millimeter. Now it's just rinse and repeat on this side. So as you can see, you can put these in two different levels. So you can use these top holes, slide it down, and these bottoms will go in here, and these holes will fit in here. But I had it too low. If you have the ceiling height, you're going to raise it all the way up as we have it now. Okay, now we're just going to install these mounting brackets. Pretty easy. They go up here with flange bolts, so these are not carriage bolts. So they have a 14 millimeter head on them. 9/16 will work as well. And then the same 15 millimeter M10 nuts on them. And then here at the top of the post, you have these little cable guides here. And it looks like where the cable inserts, it goes towards the center of the post. And you see these two holes here. There's a little dowel here that fits in one side, so it's kind of two-sided. It'll work on either post. So the dowel will fit through one hole, and then the nut and bolt, or the bolt, will go through the other hole. And these are just 10 millimeter. The nut and the bolt are 10 millimeter. So make sure you get the little dowel in the one hole. And again, just rinse and repeat for this side. So now we have to put together the cross brace that goes across the top. There's instructions that tell you where to put these bolts. You can also measure your mounting holes. It gives you an idea of where it needs to be. It's kind of pretty self-explanatory, really. It's putting together an erector set, so pretty easy to figure that out. And same flange bolts with nuts to the inside. Now we have to install the safety bar. Basically, this is the max lift. When it reaches the max lift, the car will actually hit this and shut the lift off. These are just little Phillips head screws with 10 millimeter nuts on them. M6 nuts, which are 10 millimeter. This is pretty self-explanatory, but basically you have a bracket here, two screws that go through it, and the rod goes through this bracket, and this is your trigger or your switch that automatically senses when there's pressure against it, and will shut the machine off. Now we just got to install two more of these cable guides, one on each end, with the little M6 bolts and nuts, so 10 millimeter head. And it looks like these mount on the outside of the beam. Okay, the instructions aren't the best on installing this safety latch. So we're going to go with the best that we can figure this out. I do know that you'll want to go ahead and pre-assemble this shaft here with one lock ring on it and with a thick washer. And then that should slide through there like that. Then you're going to have this spring, and then the handle, and then that little shim of a washer. Okay, this is actually after the fact, after we've got the lift installed and everything. We found out we had all this installed wrong, or not all of it, a couple of things. So look at the instructions very carefully, but again, they're not really clear on this. But basically you'll have the external spring here that pushes on the actual lock, and then you have a small spring in here that actually springs the handle back. That's going to go between the handle and the safety lock. So it's going to go in here, and then the handle's on the very outside. If you don't do that, then it's not going to fit in your slot on your cover here. When you go to put this cover on, it won't fit in that slot correctly. So make sure you have the handle, then the spring, then the actual safety lock. Also, what it comes with, the instructions are not clear at all with these shims. And these shims, basically, I'm assuming you're just going to use them if you need them. On this one, I've got one shim here that kind of shims the safety lock away from here. But at the same time, I really can't add any more because it's getting tight in here. And you don't want it so tight that it doesn't allow your safety lock to operate. So now when I pull down the handle, it will open up the lock. But also, if I let up, it's going to close it.
Sorry for the blurriness on this clip. This is for the safety cable that runs between the two safety latches. Pretty self-explanatory. You have like, I think, 4 pulleys, one at the top and one at the bottom of each one of the columns that you feed this through and connect to the 2 safety locks. The importance here is you don't want this too tight or too loose. We'll address this later on as well.
With these cable guides, you don't have to unbolt it, or nor do you have to undo the cable. The cable will just slide in like this. And then you can insert the end in, and same on that one. And then run your cable down and adjust it once you get down to the latch. Now we just got to raise this to the first latch. So to run this cable, you can start from either end. Make sure this is locked up, so it's not going to go anywhere. And then the hole is right up here. Now once you get it started, you can probably reach it with a socket and ratchet. But initially, we've got to get it started. Now once we get started, take it around this pulley. And really, after we get that around the pulley, we can put this cover back on there. And that will ensure our cable does not come loose. I'm really doing this backwards. You've got to pull this 10 millimeter or a 10 millimeter nut. I think it's an M6. Slide that out of the way so you can actually feed the cable on that pulley right there. And then once you do that, you can slide this back over and tighten that up. Now that we've got it looped around both pulleys, now this one, we've got a lock nut on the bottom. And then we'll tension those to make sure they've got even tension on both cables.
Now we'll need to mount the motor and hydraulics here. So basically it's just lifting up pretty heavy to get it up there, and then run the nuts and bolts in there and get it nice and level.
So you're going to have 3 hoses. You're going to have 2 of these that are longer hoses, and then you're going to have one here which connects. This actually connects, this T actually connects these 2 hoses, and the other end of this actually goes to your valve body there at the pump. So basically this one's going to run from the pump up to the top of the lift and then connect with that T to the other 2 hoses. So these 2 hoses run up each side, each post, and meet in the middle. So these hoses actually connect down here at the bottom of these cylinders here. And so there's a small hole on the side of the post of the lift that goes in there straight, and then you work your way in there and finger tighten those, and then you can put a wrench on them. It's a little difficult because of this plate and the pulley. I don't know why they didn't recommend to do that first, but they didn't. But anyway, you could probably take this plate off, get to it a little bit easier, but you still have the bracket there holding the pulley. But it's in there. Once you get that finger tight, then you tighten it a couple of turns and you should be good. So the hose exits here on the side of the post and it runs up here, and then you'll have these little holders, brackets that actually use little carriage bolts that go through, and then you have the nuts to put on it that holds that bracket, almost like an EMT strap that holds those hoses. I don't have them completely tight yet, and it runs up the post, and then you'll see it go all the way up the post, a couple of those brackets, and then out the top up there, and we'll show you that view in just one moment. Okay, now to connect the hose onto the valve body here, you've got these labeled right here on this valve block, and this says P1. You have a P2 on the other side and a 6mm Allen. We'll take that out. And then you'll get this little adapter here. It's got an O-ring on it, so lube up that O-ring, put a little oil on it. And then it's a 17mm. Just give it a little tighten because it does have an O-ring, so that's going to seal well. And then that's where our hose is going to connect. So our hose is connecting here. This is the one with the T on one end and the 90 on the other. And we're just going to finger tighten this right now. There we go. And same thing here. These brackets. I'm going to hold this hose in. So this is the part they don't get really specific on these hydraulic lines. They run down from the pump as well as up from the other side of the cylinder as well. So what you have here is you have two of these hoses that come up from one side, and again, they don't get real specific, but you run one, which this is the one with the 90 on it. You run this one over the top, and then this one goes underneath and kind of goes through the frame on the top here. Now it has an individual strap here to hold it in place, and then basically I just kind of zip tied it together, and on the bottom side you've got the straps that hold it down, and then I just zip tied it to it, and then I'll take you to the middle here in a moment. I still have to tension these cables, so they are definitely, they're not adjusted yet, so they'll get free and clear, but basically here in the middle, this is where your 90 goes into the T, and I've not tightened any of these yet on purpose, kept them all loose so they're all finger tight, and I've zip tied this again to the frame just to keep it out of the way. And then on this one again, you've got the clamps that run down all the way to the end. Okay, now we've got all the hoses run and finger tight. I'm going to go ahead and snug this one up. By the way, you don't have to crush these. It has a compression fitting.
And make sure you tighten all of the hydraulic joints, all of the hydraulic fittings as well on the top as well as the bottom of the cylinders and at the motor.
Okay, so we have all our electric actually run to the motor, to the box here. By the way, this is the switch plate. You don't have to add another box or anything. You can pull the front of this off. Plenty of room in here to make all your wiring connections. Now we are running the overhead switch. I'll show you that here in a moment. So the overhead switch is just two wires. It's basically a switched wire, so it's a wire in, wire out. We'll wire that in one moment. And then we have our 220 leg, so basically 110 here, 110 here, so on the black and red, and then we have a ground. So we'll ground this out. We'll run one of these to the switch and the other one to the other line here, and that's all marked out in the manual. That's pretty easy to understand. What's not really laid out is how to route all these wires here. But it's really self-explanatory once you start thinking about it. You just want to run all these things where there's no moving parts. And we decided rather than to run any flexible conduit, anything like that, well, this is a flexible type conduit, but rather than the metal stuff, we ran some seal tight all the way up to a box in the ceiling and ran that all the way down here and terminated it right here in this box. And we zip tied all these things together to keep them nice and tight. We'll show you the overhead view in one moment. Let's talk about wiring these. So basically what the instructions tell you to do, and again, it's a pretty simple task. So we have the overhead switch, which is where if the car goes up too high, it trips the switch and cuts the power to the lift. That's here, this black and this white. Now, it says if you're going to run the overhead lift that where this wire is already broken in here, I say broken, where there is a wire nut, take that off. And these are all labeled. This says wire number 3 and wire number 7. And it says run one side of this switch to wire number 3 and one side to wire number 7. Doesn't matter which. Like I said, it's just kind of a dumb switch. So we'll just reuse this wire nut here. And the other side of the switch to wire number 7. And make sure with stranded wire that you get the wire nut on nice and tight and then it grabs. A lot of time with stranded, you'll get one that just kind of backs up and doesn't actually go into the wire nut. So make sure you got a nice and secure connection. A good thing also is to wrap this in electrical tape when you're done. Just keeps the wire nut from backing off, but whatever you feel is comfortable. So now we've got the switch, the overhead switch actually wired in, and now we need to wire the rest of this power in. Now the ground is going to go to ground, so pretty simple, green to green. And then we're going to have one of these legs that are going to go to the white power wire going to the motor. By the way, don't misthink and think that the white wire is a neutral, because it is not. It's actually for power going straight to the motor. And then we're going to go black straight to this switch, which I believe is number 9. Now we can just gently stuff all our wiring in here. And put our screws in. Okay, this is the overhead switch that activates when the car goes too high and hits this bar and it goes up and goes past level. It will actually cut the power to the main switch and to the main pump. And this wire, basically, this is going to loosely bolt in here, so don't worry about having to clamp that tight, because it needs to move, it needs to pivot. Very simple switch located in this small piece of PVC. Very easy to put on. You may put it on upside down, you'll be able to know, because it won't run when you get it wired up. Then you can just take this bolt out, flip it around, and put it on the correct way. It was on correct when we put it on. Anyway, this wire, I have it going up and through, and then basically wire tying it to the hydraulic hose and following it down through the lift, as well as my seal tight and my electrical that's coming in. I have it also following down through the lift, and just keeping everything zip tied up and nice and tidy. Okay, so basically we've got our hydraulic lines tightened up finally. By the way, don't forget to do the one overhead. So we've got our hydraulic lines on, we've got our tank full, and now we're ready to hit the button. So first thing it's going to do is fill all these lines.
We didn't actually show filling the hydraulic tank with fluid. It's pretty self-explanatory. You'll want to run AW32 or AW46. You can read about which is best, but typically AW32 is what's found in most places and will work just fine for you. You can run 46, which is a little bit thicker if you're in a warm environment, but you wouldn't want to do that in a cold environment. But basically, we filled the tank with about 2 3/4 gallons of fluid as they recommend.
They're all vacant. The cylinders were probably pretty vacant as well. There may have been a little residual stored in there, but for the most part, it's got to pump all this fluid up through all the lines, so we've got to purge a lot of air before we see the lift move. Now, what we want to do is we want to raise this lift till we see it move, and then we want to lower it back down on some stops, and then we'll purge the air from it. So, here we go. By the way, while you're pushing the button, you'll watch this, this hydraulic fluid lower. So that's filling your cylinders, your rams. It looks like we're about to move here. I heard that. There we go. So you hear the clicking. That's getting on each one of the safety stops. The instructions say to raise the lift about 2 feet, which we're a little more than that, but we should be okay. And then it says crack the bleeder screws, probably 2 turns on top of the cylinders. I'll show you that here in a moment. And once fluid starts coming out, then close it off, do the other side, and then lower it all the way down. You should be good. So that's what we're going to do now. Okay, here's the bleeder screws right here on top of the cylinders. By the way, it is a 5 millimeter. So let's see if we can't break these free. Definitely hear them hissing. Okay, this is actually after the fact, after we've got the lift installed and everything. We found out we had all this installed wrong, or not all of it, a couple of things. So look at the instructions very carefully, but again, they're not really clear on this. But basically you'll have the external spring here that pushes on the actual lock, and then you have a small spring in here that actually springs the handle back. That's going to go between the handle and the safety lock. So it's going to go in here, and then the handle's on the very outside. If you don't do that, then it's not going to fit in your slot on your cover here. When you go to put this cover on, it won't fit in that slot correctly. So make sure you have the handle, then the spring, then the actual safety lock. Also, what it comes with, the instructions are not clear at all with these shims. And these shims, basically, I'm assuming you're just going to use them if you need them. On this one, I've got one shim here that kind of shims the safety lock away from here. But at the same time, I really can't add any more because it's getting tight in here. And you don't want it so tight that it doesn't allow your safety lock to operate. So now when I pull down the handle, it will open up the lock. But also, if I let up, it's going to close it. Also, with this cable adjustment here, you want it loose enough, don't have it too tight, to where on the other side it's going to allow that lock to snap back into place. We had it too tight, had all the tension out of it, and it wasn't actually allowing that lock to click back. That's probably the most important feature on this lift are these safety locks, because then it allows these to click into place every few inches, and that's going to hold the brunt of the weight, not just the hydraulics. So that's your safety feature. Make sure these are working. Make sure your cable is tensioned right. Make sure they're on the pulleys and that everything is functioning correctly. So now when I bring down the lift, you'll see that that lock will snap into place. And now we're resting on the lock and not on the hydraulics. Okay, so now that we have our safety locks and all our cables adjusted correctly, and we need to take our knob off of there, and then we can mount this. And make sure you can get your knob to thread on there and that you get full movement out of it. Yep. Then we can tighten these up. So now it's time to install each one of the arms, and all these arms are set up about the same as far as on the pivot points. And they have these, basically the anti-rotation gears that keep the arms from just kind of flopping around unless you pull up on the pin. And the big pin here, this is going to slide in here, but of course it's not going to go in because all these anti-rotation gears are already bolted on the arm. So we have to take those off. So just take your wrench, take your socket. They're not on there very tight, but all these have to come off the arms before you install them. And they want all the places where it rotates, all your movement to be greased as well. So we want to put a little grease on, of course, all the holes here, probably on these gears as well, before we install it. So now when this pin goes down, once it's in, this will slide in there, Then we put the bolts back in and we're good to go. So we're going to grease these holes up here. And your groove is going to go down and sit in there like that. Install the bolts, but not tight. So you know your pin's about flush here. Just have the beveled edge on top. That tells you that's all the way in. So if, like in our case, that we've got the geared teeth on this spring-loaded pin to where it won't come around, and close this all the way up, and then you should be able to turn that gear and it mesh in there. If it doesn't mesh, obviously your bevel's wrong. You need to flip it over. Now we can tighten those bolts, and we should be good to go because we've got all that rotation and we're good. So I'm going to turn it all the way around here and tighten these bolts. Okay, so now your lift is operational. One of the things you need to do before you start lifting heavy things like this is actually check the balance of the lift, and that's done with the cables. So you need to make sure that they're rising at the same time. Now, a lot of people like to hear the clicks both at the same time. In other words, the safety click on the left tower or the passenger side tower and the driver's side tower clicking at the same time. So in other words, listen for it right here. So you heard two different clicks. We heard the click here and the click over there, clunk, clunk. Now we know that that's engaging the safety mechanism, and now it's actually locking in mechanically into the lift. We're not resting on the hydraulics anymore. Now we can come down and actually rest on that safety stop. Now, a lot of people will say, well, adjust that until you hear the clunks at the same time. But I heard something that made a lot of sense, and somebody said, you know what? I like to adjust it about a 1/4 inch out so that I can still hear very specifically the clunk here and the clunk there. In other words, we're not mistaking that both of them are happening at the same time, but we can hear this one click in or clunk in and that one clunk in. Gives us that audible, recognition that, hey, this one's locked in and this one's locked in. I like that. That makes a lot of sense. So that's what I'm going to do. Right now I'm about a 1/2 inch out, so I need a couple of turns on the cables, but I am very close. So right now I'm resting on those stops. I can't go down any further, and my locks actually won't disengage because it's actually resting on there. So I'll raise it up a little bit, and then we'll bring this down. And again, we'll listen to that once more. So here we go. Okay, so this one just clunked in, and now that one clunked in. So again, I'm about a 1/2 inch out, so I want it a little closer than that, but again, I want to hear that audible noise of it clunking in, and I know that that safety is engaging into that post. Okay, so we need to adjust this to be a little tauner on this side. In other words, for it to be a little higher once they balance out, because this one's clunking a little later than the other one. And we do this right here with this adjustment. There's one here, and then there's one, this cable goes down, does a U at the bottom and comes back up. A little harder to get to. You can take a long extension and some vice grips to hold the wire and make your turns, because these are nylock nuts here on the bottom, so you can't just turn them. But on this one, so at the top, we'll have a 22 millimeter nut. Can back that off a little, and then I can get my 1/4 turn of adjustment. I can just hold it with the wrench, make my turns with my pliers here. And then I can put my nut down here and lock it in. And there we go. Okay, now I want to check to see if our auxiliary cutoff or emergency cutoff, whatever that is, when the car or truck touches that top bar up there, it should trip that switch and actually shut the lift off. That's what we're going to test now. All right, here we go. We're going to run the lift. Pretty cool. So it's a simple switch. Once it's tripped, it shuts it off, but it will let it keep going. Once it comes back down, I can re-engage. Okay, so you'll notice right now the lift is actually up about 3 feet, and you can see the pins are engaged right here on the teeth, and it's keeping that arm, even without any pressure on it, it would not let it turn. That's kind of the gearing mechanism there to lock it into place so it doesn't swivel. However, here's a cool thing. Once the lift goes all the way down. So right now, these pins, I have to pull them up and disengage it, which they're really locked in because all this weight is on here. Now watch this as this lift gets all the way to the ground. Now obviously the weight is coming off of it right now. It's putting the car on the ground. And now watch these pins. See, it just pushed the pins automatically once it sits all the way down. And now these arms can flex. So I don't have to pull a pin. All I can do is push those arms and move them out of the way as I need to. So that's pretty cool that as it goes all the way down, it automatically lifts those pins out of the way, and then we can rotate those legs without having to pull them up. Now with this muscle car, we had the small extensions on here to lift this car up. It's really not a real low car, but at the same time, it's not really high either. So I don't know, those may be 4-inch extensions. But you can run it without the extensions. You also have the screw adapters or the actual screw mechanism built right there into the pads as well. So you have that 4-inch adapter, then you have the screw mechanism where it automatically will run in and out. And then we also have the longer extensions right here on this cool little holder that bolts right here on to the lift. So you have these longer extensions as well. They all have O-rings, and you grease them up so they fit nice and tight. And then we have another U-shaped adapter up there. So forgive the shaky hand for getting this low, but I'm going to pull this out. And you see, as I mentioned, you've got O-rings on here, so we've got them greased up. You've also got a flat spot right here machined into this, and that rests against this pin so that once it's in here, that you can just twist this and run this up. And I believe it's a 2-stage as well. Yeah, so there's a second stage coming up. And then you can screw it back down and go all the way flat. So pretty cool feature built right into the pads. So through this installation, really before the installation, when this showed up on the pallet, which I don't even know if we have pictures of it, but you could just tell by the boxing of it or the crating of it, all steel construction, even bolted together inside the pallet. It was keeping everything nice and tidy. Big wooden box in there with all your controls in there. So it was boxed and crated really, really well. So we saw that quality right out of the gate. And then when you look at the build quality of this lift, a lot of 1/4-inch steel construction. The base plates are thicker than that. I think they're 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch. But anyway, really nice thick steel throughout this build. And we really didn't notice anything that was shortcutted, if you will, when it came to the build quality. Now, there were a couple of gotchas in the instructions that really weren't that clear, but I think we covered those. And again, as I mentioned in the intro, you're probably going to have a professional install this. And this is not a piece of furniture from IKEA. If that were the case, then we would be all over it about, saying, well, the instructions weren't clear. But the instructions will get you through, and as long as you have a little intuitive knowledge, which I kind of understand that Atlas probably thinks, listen, if you're not used to using a lot of these tools, you probably shouldn't be installing this lift, and I fully agree with them on that. So again, some non-clarity or some information in the instructions could have been more clear, maybe some better pictures, if you will, and diagrams, but hey, that's why we're here. That's why we're showing you. But anyway, you can really walk yourself through this with the instructions, as well as just a little bit of knowledge of how things work. I will say the adjustment on the cables were not a pain, but you kind of got to get used to it and use it a few times and listen to the clunks and the safety clunks, things like that. And I hope that made sense about how we were wanting to kind of offset those clunks so that we can actually hear from one side to the other to make sure those safety latches are engaging. And as I mentioned in the actual installation part of this, that is one of the most important things. Make sure your safety latches are actually catching every time, and make sure both of them are doing it. And I recommend when you first start running this, make sure you have the covers off of both safety latches. So you can watch those, go on both sides, use somebody else, and maybe even take a camera and set it up to make sure you're seeing those latches fully engaged and not just partially engaged and not staying open as well. I know in the beginning we had our cable a little too tight and it wasn't allowing that secondary or the opposite side latch to fully engage. We got that fixed, again, before we ever lifted anything, and this thing has run really, really well. We're really impressed with it. We're going to do a follow-up on this as well, but hopefully this installation of this showed you some of the build quality, showed you some of the features. By the way, talking about features, we love the fact that we've got that mounting bracket here on the side of the post that holds our adapters, the fact that it comes with several adapters, and really like the extending arms on this, and also when it lowers all the way and it actually drives the pins out so you can rotate those arms freely. Again, I know a lot of lifts include that, but at the same time, the fact that it has that is very nice to have. So once you lower it all the way, you can kind of kick those arms out of the way and drive the car out, drive the truck out, what have you. Now, price on these. Atlas makes a slew of lifts from your beginner, if you will, for the light cars, if you will, all the way up to heavy trucks and way past our 10,000 pound lift. Now this specific one is ALI certified, and you can get several lifts from them in their ALI certified category, if you will. This is also part of their Atlas Platinum series. Now again, they go up to about as heavy as you want to go. As far as price goes, you're going to spend a few grand. Now you're saying, well, Tim, you're really not saying a lot, but I'll tell you why I'm not saying a lot, because it's 2021. Beef has just gone up, gas has gone up, wood has gone out of sight. Anything to do with construction, eating, any part of our lives, gasoline, prices are going through the roof. So if I said something right now, there's a good chance that in a week, 2 weeks, a month from now, prices are going to be drastically different. I will tell you, in the entry level right now, for a couple of grand, a little more than a couple of grand, you can get an entry level lift, if you will. The more you go up from there, the more you get ALI certified, and the heavier you get, obviously, heavier steel construction, more features, you're going to pay for that. So check it out from your dealer. Again, this is the Atlas Platinum Series. We love it so far. We'll stay in touch. We'll do another video of follow-up and how things are going after a few months, and maybe even touch on some maintenance items. If you like this video, would you hit that like button, that thumbs up, and give us a thumbs up? And also, if you would subscribe to our channel. If you loved our video. If you hated our video, by all means, give us a thumbs down. But would you let us know in the comments why? Have a great day and keep smiling.